Still getting used to Zoom. I think we're going to be transitioning back to Teams for next month as well, everyone. So
just bear with us for the moment while we're still in Zoom land. Okay, so thanks again for everyone for dialing in to our Power BI for Enviro session in June. Before, as I just touched on, before we jump into June, we've now got up the July event. So we're returning back to the energy sector and Power BI for the energy sector with a few different applications of people presenting. We're also likely to have a third person from the Green Building Council of Australia presenting. So I might just mute everyone.
Anyway,
Yeah, we're still back. So yeah, we're likely to have a third presenter as well. So just watch this space, but this event for July is now up on the meetup page. So encourage you to jump on and we'll put a link in the chat later on. So today's session, Alice is going to run through Power BI 101. So we've got some Streamflow data sets. She'll show you quickly how we can bring that into Power BI and create some really simple yet powerful visualizations and a simple report from that. And we'd like to welcome and thank Greg Nash, who's our guest MVP on the call. And Greg's going to make himself available both during the first session, but also afterwards to both share a bit about himself, but mainly some Q&A from all of you on the call who would like to learn a little bit more about Power BI. He's the Melbourne Power BI meetup group leader and has been for a fair few years. So a wealth of knowledge, and I'll let him tell a bit more about himself in the second half of the session. So just a bit of housekeeping. The second meetup in a row that we're trialing Zoom. We're moving back to Teams from July. So would encourage you to type your questions in the chat as you sort of want to ask them as we go through. We'll try and answer them during the sessions, but then have a bit of time available for afterwards. And just so everyone knows, the session's being recorded and we'll share it afterwards with the blog and our YouTube channel. Just like to acknowledge the people of the Bunurong region as the traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So Alice and I are actually dialing in from Cape Patterson down near Wonthaggi in the Bunurong region, and there's a photo of running along the beach the other day. So it's a pretty nice part of the world, and just like to acknowledge the traditional owners. Discovery Eye, so Alice and I are the co-founders of Discovery Eye, as well as a few other people that we work with. So what we do is we focus on Power BI training and mentoring, Power BI custom visual development, and we have a few in the marketplace, end-to-end Power BI reporting solutions, so tapping into data sources and helping with the automation of data into these Power BI reports. We also do a bit of graphic design, so create supporting infographics and animations, and also custom web applications and web tools. So we work largely in the environmental and the water space. So Discovery Eye is Discover Environmental Intelligence. And so, yeah, that's our company. And so if you work in that space and want a bit of information, we love obviously connecting with people out in the community and understanding a bit more about different applications of Power BI. And I'll now pass you over to Alice, who will run the Power BI 101.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I might just plug in my headset. Christian will be on another computer to answer questions, but just so we've got good sound quality. Bear with me for 2 minutes. I'll just make sure I'm all connected up. Awesome, cool. So thank you so much for joining today. We get a lot of questions from people across the environmental industry about what is Power BI. So it can be a fairly new tool or concept to a lot of people who haven't seen it before. But we think it's really, really powerful for analyzing all sorts of different data, including environmental data. So today, what I'm going to walk through is just a quick intro into what is Power BI, kind of specifically for how we apply it to the environmental industry. And also give a short, like 15 to 20 minute demo from a blank canvas, how we can get started. So going through the core components of Power BI and creating a really simple, interactive report for visualizing some streamflow data. So Power BI, it's Microsoft's BI or business intelligence tool. And I like to think of it as 4 kind of key components. So it consists of a database to combine and transform lots of different data together. It's an analysis engine, so we can perform really streamlined calculations and interrogate our data using DAX. The visualizations, so these are the really nice interactive visuals that everyone sees. So we can create really rich graphics and interactive reports for presenting our data. And also the online service. This is our kind of collaboration hub. This is where we can publish our Power BI reports up to a cloud-based secure service. We can share them with other people in our organization. We can share them with the general public as well. And it's also kind of acts as our kind of library for all our data sets and data flows, and as a central hub for finding data across the organization as well. So Power BI is a business intelligence tool, and it's kind of comparable to Tableau, Oracle, Click. But you can see a lot of people in the Power BI world love flashing around this, this chart here. This is the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And you can see this is the latest one in Feb 2021, that Microsoft is now ahead of the pack in terms of business intelligence platforms. So it is really world leading. And in the environmental industry, we have a ton of data that we often want to bring together. So things like Excel spreadsheets, spatial files, modeling output, images. And Power BI allows us to bring this all together into a centralized database to create these interactive reports, which you can share internally with your team through like Teams and SharePoint, and also with external stakeholders or the general public as well. And we'll see today it has a really nice workflow. When our data in environmental industry, we're constantly collecting data. So our data doesn't really stop. So we'll be able to see that we can build a report which can be refreshed, and our reports update when we have new information, which is really important. So this is an infographic of just how broad Power BI can actually be. So it's not as simple as I just made it out to be. It really is an end-to-end data platform and solution. And this infographic is from Melissa Coates. So she runs Coates Data Strategy. She's an expert in Power BI data governance. And you can see it touches kind of all aspects of your kind of data ecosystem in an organization. But we don't want you getting scared, because I know a lot of people on the call might be thinking, but wait, I'm not a computer programmer. I'm actually an engineer or a scientist or a researcher working in the environmental industry. So Power BI really is a tool that lots of people can kind of pick up and start using. And so myself and Christian were actually both previously environmental engineers for about 8 years. And what we did was spend a lot of time analyzing our data in Excel, or in custom modeling programs, or in tools like ArcGIS for spatial analysis. But the end result was often developing these really lengthy, often static, repetitive PDF reports, which you could imagine people, especially in the general public, trying to sift through these, find out what's going on in the environmental industry, and they'd end up picking out just a handful of numbers to base their decisions on. And we know that our data doesn't stop. So static reports for environmental data, it doesn't always kind of fit the brief these days, and we've got a lot of real-time monitoring systems out there. And that's where Power BI can be really powerful. So the power which I saw when I first got started was in the ability to transform a really lengthy static PDF report into a centralized database and kind of project dashboard to present all of these key results. And in the environmental industry, we're really lucky because we've got a lot of interesting data that we can analyze. So we often are dealing with kind of maps and spatial data. And also, it's not just the numbers, it's also representing these things through infographics, schematics, animations, things like that, images as well. So there's a lot of different types of media in there that we want to kind of communicate to people. And Power BI forms it's a really nice tool which allows us to combine both the numbers and the metrics and the charts with all sorts of other supporting information to help people analyze this info and kind of get started with it. So when you're getting started with Power BI, there's a couple of things to think about. So how do I get started in Power BI? So practically, I guess the first thing you want to do is make sure that you have Power BI installed on your machine. So there's probably, regarding licensing with any new software, it can be a bit challenging. But with Power BI, the first step is really to download the Power BI desktop, install it on your computer, and this is completely free for you to do. If you're working in an organization, you might get a little bit of red tape with your IT department because you probably aren't allowed to install an executable on your machine without permission. But it being a Microsoft product is usually kind of enough to get around this. But that's the first step. I'll show you where we can get that link in a minute. The second thing to do is just to select an easy data set to get started with. So something you're really familiar with. Make sure the data is clean to begin with. You don't want an uphill battle before you know how to use a tool. And get it like something like kind of fun and easy to analyze as well is also pretty good. My third tip is to come up with a problem that you want to solve or a question that you want answered. So don't just go about getting some data and getting started with it. Really think about, okay, what do I want to have answered? So today we're going to keep it super simple, and we want to just answer like the stream flow trends across Victoria, essentially. My fourth tip is to spend some time learning how to use Power BI. So Power BI, it is probably deceptively simple. It's a low-code drag and drop interface. We'll see that in 15 minutes we can get a pretty good report up and running. But it does take time to learn. So there's a lot of complexities involved. Set aside a block of time, go out there. There's a ton of free resources out there. I'll share a couple today as well. And the fifth thing is just have fun, explore your data. Don't be afraid to break things. I think if you break things, that's the best way to learn. You can break things and then you can go frantically online to all the blogs, try to find the answers. Power BI, it's really good. Like it gives you a couple of tips around why things might be broken, but I think that really going to the online forums, there's so many people using it out there. Chances are that people have had the same problem that you have, and you'll be able to learn a lot more and remember a lot more once you fix broken visuals. So that's a lot of talking. That's kind of in a nutshell what Power BI is and how we can apply it to the enviro industry. But really what I think is extremely useful when you're getting started is just to practically go and know what buttons to push. So today we're going to step through a really simple example. We actually do this as part of our pre-work for our Power BI for the water industry training. So this is for complete beginners. We'll go through and show you how to format your data, import it into Power BI, create a very simple data model, create some visuals, and publish it online. And then if there's time, I'll show you how you can add new data and just refresh the workflow. So let's get into it. So I guess the first thing, we'll just go back over here to the internet. The first thing you want to do is to make sure that you have, hold on. Sorry, my Zoom bar was getting in the way. So make sure that you have Power BI downloaded and installed on your machine. So you can get Power BI from the Microsoft Store, or you can get the latest releases directly if you wanted a manual download from this link here. So I think Christian will share a couple of links in the chat as well. You can see it's just an executable. You can download and install it on your machine. So in our example today, we're going to visualize some streamflow data from Victoria's Water Management Information System. So this is a really good place to get started because, as I mentioned, it has clean data. This data is coming from a database. It's already processed. It's in the same format. Very easy for us to download and get started with. So before we dive into Power BI, I'll just open up our data here and I'll show you what it looks like. So we've got, here we are. We just have some very simple data. This is really typical of environmental data. It's just some data in a Excel spreadsheet. We have some stream flow gauges and we have our data quality codes here as well. We also have some time series data here of the stream flow data. So this is stream flow over time. So before we import it into Power BI, I'd really recommend you spending just a little bit of time to format the data. And if you're importing from Excel, then I'd recommend, instead of having the data just entered into Excel like this, just on a sheet, just formatting your tables as table ranges. So this makes it a lot easier when we go to import it into Power BI. It's recognized and it's much easier in the future when you're updating your data as well. So to save it as a table range, what you can do is you can just select the data and insert a table and give your table a name. So I'm going to call this gauge locations. And do the same thing for this other table. This is our stream flow quality codes. This is how good quality the data is. Cool. So we've saved those. We've got some stream flow time series data here. And we could save this as table ranges and import this into Power BI manually. But what I'm going to do is show you another technique. So let's have a look here. You can see that we've got that same data saved as CSV files in a folder location. And we'll show you when we import this into Power BI that it's a bit of a kind of more optimal structure to have all of your time series data, if they are in a very similar format and it's repetitive, to store them as individual files in a folder location, because it makes it a lot easier when we go to refresh our data. So now that we've kind of seen what our data is and we've done a little bit of formatting, it's time to get into Power BI Desktop. So this is the Power BI Desktop interface here. And the first thing we need to do is to import our data. Sorry, I think I've got a bit of an itchy throat. So we have to import our data. I'm going to click on this big button, Import from Excel. And let's browse to the folder. Oh, let's start that again. Let's copy it in here. And it's this Excel file. Cool, and now we can see our data. You can see that we've got our table ranges here because they have this blue kind of ribbon at the top. And you can see what would happen if we didn't save this data as a table range. The entire worksheet here is selected and you can see it's quite messy and would require a little bit of transformations to get started with this one. So I've just selected those two table ranges and I'm going to click Transform Data. Oh, and what that does is it brings up our Power Query Editor window up here. And Power Query is where we can combine and transform all our data sets together. So you can see we've got our gauge locations, we've got our quality codes. These tables look pretty good. I don't think we need to do anything to this data. It looks like it's in a fine state for modeling. But we do have that additional data source, which is our Streamflow time series data. So we can go and add a new source. And this time what we want to do is we don't want to connect up to the individual file itself, but we want to connect up to the folder. So by connecting up to a folder, it allows us to import all of the data from that folder path. So I'm just going to copy this file path here. Oh, what didn't I like about it? do it the old school way. We're going to browse. Cool. And press OK. And you can see it gives you a preview of all the files there. I'm going to hit Combine and Transform. And what this does is it appends all these files one on top of each other. So behind the scenes, Power BI is doing some pretty fancy transformations here. You can see it's written all of these kind of sample files and sample functions as well for us. When you're getting started, we can just have a look at the output query that it's created here. Just keep things simple. And what we can see is that it's brought in those 3 CSV files of data. It's appended them all together, so it's in one, it'll be essentially one table. And this is really in a structure which is optimal for Power BI. But at this stage, you can see that we've got our data, we've got our date, our stream flow, quality code. What we really need is something to identify what each of these stream flow gauges are. So if we have a look at our source name again, you can see that the way that I've named the file is quite deliberate. So we've got our stream flow gauge ID here in the file name. And why this is important is we need the stream flow gauge ID identified so that we can actually join it up to our stream flow gauge table and get all that additional info like our lat, our longitude, and our gauge name as well. So what we can do then is we can do some transformations in the Power Query Editor. So we can split this column using split by delimiter. So I'm going to split it first by an underscore. And then we can do it by the decimal point. And then we can remove these other columns. And we could rename this column here so it's gauge ID. And you can see all those transformations that we just did then, they're recorded in the applied steps pane of our Power Query Editor. And you can see that this keeps a track or a log of all of the different transformations we've done in Power BI. So at any time we can go back and revisit these, confirm how have we transformed our data, go back, insert a step or modify a step as well. So it's really good compared to if you were manually processing your data in a tool like Excel, which doesn't really keep an audit log. It's up to the engineer or scientist themselves to write down what transformations they've done. So it makes it really transparent. I'm just going to do a bit of cleanup here. Let's just rename our query. So this is streamflow data. This one's quality code. And this one is gauge location. So that looks really good. When you're ready, you can hit close and apply. And what that does is it applies all those transformations that you've made to your data and it imports it into Power BI. So we can see that those 3 queries have now been imported as tables. We can have a look at our data via the data view here. And then go and have a look at our model view. And so the model view is where we build relationships between our different tables. So we can actually interact with the data and we can do calculations as well. So you can see at the moment we've got a relationship between our quality code in our quality code table and our streamflow data table. And what we need is a relationship between the gauge location table and our streamflow data table as well. So this relationship here was created because we've got auto detect relationship on, and you can see that the column name is the same in both tables, and it would have the same data type as well. So we can create a relationship simply by clicking on the relevant field and dragging it to create that relationship between these 2 tables. And now we're ready to start building out our interactive visuals. So Power BI, it's really a drag and drop interface. We can get started really quickly. I'm going to create first a map to show the location of these points. So we can bring in our latitude here, longitude, and maybe the gauge name is a legend, so we can see it at the top. We can also bring in maybe a time series chart to have a look at the trends. So we can bring our date in, our stream flow, and the legend will be our gauge name. So you can see here that Power BI, it automatically detects how we want to aggregate our data up. You can see that by default, it thinks that we want to count our stream flow. So that doesn't really make sense. Probably what we want to do is we want to sum up the stream flow. So you can change those measures here as well. Cool, and you can see that as with any live demo, I might not have built my data model correctly. We've got a blank here. You can see that there's no relationship between these two tables. So let's go back and see what we've done. You can see that I have linked up the wrong fields in our relationship view. And this is really good because it shows just how easy it is to go back and correct these relationships, and also why having relationships is so important. So you can see that by accident, I've linked up my stream flow data with my gauge ID, whereas really what it should be is my gauge IDs linked up. So if we go and we correct this relationship, go back here and you can see that the visuals now are plotting as they should. And just it shows the importance of having that relationship built. So now we'll just finish it off. We'll add a couple more visuals in. It's always good to put some slices so that we can easily slice our data. We can bring our gauge name in here and we can make it a drop down. And maybe another slicer as well. Maybe we want to slice on the date. Cool, and you can see that we can zoom in to just a couple of years. We can change this visual so it's not a date hierarchy anymore, it's just a date. And you can get a lot more information that way. But I think at this stage it's looking pretty good. So I'm just going to save this one. We'll save it here as maybe stream flow. And the very last step is just to publish it up to the online service so we can share and collaborate with this report with our colleagues. So we can hit this big publish button here, and this publishes the report online. So just take a minute. You can see that before you publish, just make sure that you are signed in to Power BI. It will prompt you. You can get a free Microsoft account to be able to publish reports up to your own workspace, or you'll need a pro account if you want to publish it to your organizational workspace and share with other people in your organization. So here we can publish it to this workspace here. And then we can interact with the report just like we were in the desktop, but now you're in the online service. We can create a dashboard as well from the online service. You can do a lot of functionality. You can chat in Teams, you can comment, collaborate, export your report and things like that. But lastly, just to close out, I want to show you just how cool the workflow is when we have more data added into the mix. Just how do we go about refreshing and updating our data? So let's have a look. Here we only had 3 CSV files. Let's pretend that we had a couple more extra files here. So I'm going to copy these additional files in. And then if we have a look at our data here, we'll open it up. We've got a couple more gauges to add in to our stream flow gauge list. So we've got a bit more of a complete table here. So I'm just literally going to copy this data in. We're going to save this and close it. And then if we hit this refresh button, what we can do now is Power BI is going back to those data sources where we connected up to, and it's importing the additional data and doing any of the calculations, transformations, or updating the visuals that we've done using this new data set. So you can see now that instead of just 3 gauges, we've got maybe 7 gauges here, and all of our visuals and calcs are updated. So we did this manually here in the Power BI desktop, but you could imagine if you publish up to the Power BI online service, you can set up scheduled refreshes to automate this data refresh. And if you've configured your data sources correctly, then you could bring data in and have more kind of live data coming in. So with a little bit more time, you could build out your reports, make it look a little bit more fancy, include things like your corporate theme files, backgrounds, a bit more analysis on your data, include a date table in your data model as well. So this is what we go through in the first module, first half-day session of one of our training courses. So people who are complete beginners, you can learn to build out reports really quick and easy as well. But you can see just in probably 15 or 20 minutes, we built a pretty good report, something that anyone can use to get started with and just start playing around with the data as well. So if you were wanting to get started, we'll just, I'll point you in the direction of this. This is a blog I think we wrote after our first or second meetup with this group, because we had a lot of questions all around how do we get started, what resources are there out there. So we've listed our favorite resources here and split them up into things like general, Power BI, you've got report and visualization. These are all our go-to people in the community who release really good quality content. The majority of it is free as well. So there's a lot of different resources out there as well. And if you are keen, at Discovery Eye, we do training tailored for the environmental and water industries. So we've got 4 different courses out there as well, which are really practical to learn kind of practical tips and tricks for how to actually build reports. So that was a very quick intro into Power BI for the enviro industry, a bit of an overview of how you could get started. I'd really recommend getting started kind of practically. So that's what I did. I had a challenge I had to solve at my old company. I just got in there, got started, and you can learn a lot in a short period of time as well. If you have a really kind of big challenge to solve, there's heaps of info out there. But now I'd like to quickly introduce Greg Nash. So I'm sure that after that session, everyone on the call might, even if you are a bit of an expert, you've got a lot of maybe questions at this stage of your Power BI journey. Everyone's always learning. Or if you're a beginner, then you want to know a little bit more info, then I'd love to introduce Greg Nash. So Greg is founder and principal consultant for Dear Watson Consulting. He is a recognized and self-proclaimed Power BI unicorn. Greg has spent a lifetime in IT and more recently as a passionate advocate for Microsoft Power BI and the Power Platform. He's got extensive experience in developing and deploying Power Platform solutions to a wide range of industries and organizations. And he's hosted the Melbourne Power BI user group, a trainer, speaker, content creator, and a data platform MVP. So now is the time to ask all of your tricky questions about Power BI. So yeah, welcome, Greg. I'm going to stop sharing and feel free also to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Alice. Can everybody hear me okay before I start rambling on?
Yep. No, you sound good.
Oh, good. Appreciate the invite. And yeah, I think just to pick up on a couple of points you made during that demo, that was a great demo. Well done, Alice. A great introduction to the world of Power BI. That practical approach, that's the best way to learn this tool. It's definitely the way that I learned. So my background, as Alice sort of mentioned in the intro there, I come from an IT background. I was an operational IT person in large enterprises, and my job basically was jockeying spreadsheet reporting, like doing Excel. I was an Excel guy, really great at Excel, loved doing the numbers, but had limited tools available to me to be actually nice sports and to build those kind of interactive reports that we have available to us now. And I discovered Power BI when it was in Excel as a tool called Power Pivot, and then I bought this book. It's called Power Pivot and Power BI for the Excel User by Rob Colley. This is one of the sort of foundational books of learning Power BI, and it's still a great book if you're coming from an Excel background. And yeah, and then went down the rabbit hole, I suppose, in terms of got into it. And don't hold it against me, exactly, Nat. Don't hold enterprise IT guy against me, for sure. The world of Power BI. So yeah, find a data set and build something cool is definitely the best way to pick up Power BI, because I think even like there's demo data sets inside Power BI these days that you can try out, but even those like I just built a report actually on the demo data set while Alice was talking there, and like in the data set you only do sales on a Tuesday, for example, right? There's all these weird things about, because it's fake data, you don't get the same kind of experience as when you're dealing with real life data. So either you can, there's some great resources for finding real live data. A lot of the machine learning data sets are great for Power BI. There's a thing called the UCI machine learning data reference. I'll put a link to it in the chat in a second. And that's got a bunch of real world data that you can, like they're like wine club ratings and like school results from a school in Brazil and like all this kind of stuff that these machine learning guys use to try and get their machine learning to work. But it's also a great data set to do some UCI machine learning repository. That's exactly right, Arush. Thank you very much. Anyway, I'm here to answer questions. As Alice said, I'm a data platform MVP. I'm based in Melbourne. I run the Power BI user group for Melbourne. Feel free to come along. We're doing hybrid next time. I think we've got Chris Webb from England and Pete Myers, another data platform MVP, doing a presentation coming up in July. It's going to be hybrid, so it'll be online and in person, and we'll have food and drink and fun. So it'd be good to see you guys.
That's awesome. Oh, cool. Thank you so much, Greg. Yeah, so please feel free to go off mute and ask your question directly, or type in the chat as well what your questions are. Does anyone have a question to kick off?
I can probably chime in with the first one to get us started, I suppose. So, so Greg, I suppose you've probably dealt with a lot of enterprise customers here and there. I suppose, have you faced any particular problems, especially on the governance side of things, that would have been, I would say, helped by getting governance under control sooner, and like what kind of experiences you've had there?
Yeah, governance is a tricky one, and in the world of Power BI, you have to wear a lot of different hats, and sort of governance and administration is one that you sort of come across. I think, like a lot of us join the Power BI world, and then we end up in enterprise, and then suddenly there's all of these extra considerations when it comes to data. And so when we say governance, we mean data, we mean security, we mean data quality, we mean who has access to the data, ethics. Should we be doing this? Like that's a question that a lot of people don't think about, and so there's the funny thing about governance is that organizations find it really, really difficult to do, and there's often not a very good structure in place in large organizations for data, and so particularly around who operationally, so which person inside your organization owns your product data, or if you're talking about that Streamflow data, for example, Alice, who owns that data? Who's the person that's responsible for ensuring that data is coming in correctly? And that could be like a member of the engineering team, or a member of like somebody who's responsible for ensuring that Streamflow data is actually, the operational side of the Streamflow data is actually working. And so that's a key consideration that organizations struggle with today, and data is a complex environment like that.
And that's also something to keep in mind for people getting started in organizations. So we work both with the IT and the BI admin teams, but also with the engineers. And the engineers, they just want to use the tools. They want to kind of analyze their data. It's their data. They don't understand why there's all this red tape involved. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have the BI team who really has to govern this closely. Otherwise, it can end up into a bit of a mess with
duplicated data all across the organization. No one trusts any of this info, or it doesn't update correctly. So there is a bit of a balance, I think, in terms of training and upskilling, but giving people the tools they need at the same time as well.
Yeah, it's a balance between giving people access to the data that they need to be able to operationally do what they want to do, but also control that in a way that is, you know, is not protects your organization from, you know, from bad things happen because they leak data or whatever. And some organizations go too far one way, and the IT team's really restrictive, and you can't get access to anything, and you have to jump through all these red tape. And other organizations are too loose, and they end up with this sort of dog's breakfast of data sets all over the place. And the guiding principles around governance in enterprise is like, do just enough governance. So the minimal amount of governance that gets you to the place that you need to be is usually, you know, it's very much a balancing act. There's quite a few questions coming through though. So
yeah, so in the theme of I think we're getting lots on governance. So there's another question about someone needs this feature as a Power BI admin. Is it possible to get the tenant settings through PowerShell script or any other that can help automate the checking process?
Yeah, so there is an API for Power BI, the Power BI API, which you can access through, say, PowerShell script or programmatically. So you can programmatically interact with workspaces and reports. You can deploy reports automatically. You can download and upload PBIX files automatically. You can kick off a refresh automatically, or programmatically via the Power BI API. So that's one, if you're interested in automation in the Power BI world, that's one you need to look at.
I think Gilbert from Formu, I think he's got a few blogs around using that. Like I think he has one in the PowerShell script and also Azure Data Factory.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of depends if you want to, if you're trying to pull, so you can kind of get data out of Power BI via the XMLA endpoint through automation. There's lots of different ways to interact with the Power BI service programmatically if you're looking to, say, automate things. But it is something that's fairly specialized. You'll need somebody that's familiar with APIs to do that.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got a question from Simon Walker asking, would you recommend using the development pipeline as part of your DevOps?
Yeah, so DevOps and Power BI is still an emerging sort of area, and it's interesting. That API, so the way that we do pipelines is we use Azure DevOps pipelines, which is an automation service, and then we run PowerShell scripts that interact with that Power BI API that I was just talking about. So we don't use the deployment pipelines just yet. I think they're not quite there. There's a couple of things. We had a pretty good session on deployment pipelines with Zoe at the Power BI meetup last week. Actually, she sort of pivoted. She was originally doing buttons on Power BI reports, and then she pivoted to deployment pipelines because she'd been mucking around with it. And there's some limitations in the deployment pipeline for premium at the moment that I think it's still getting there, but it's not quite there yet. There's things like the dev test prod deployment of those PBIX files. If you are in premium, like it's a premium feature and you can use the API. If you're not premium, that's, but there's still a few use cases to iron out. There's no code sort of Git integration or anything like that, which I think is a big piece for Power BI as well, is that idea of being able to branch your code and merge it in again and have multiple versions and all that kind of stuff. That's still a bit immature.
Thanks, Greg. Answer my question.
Awesome. Cool. And I think you've got a name out there, Greg, for a DevOps and Power BI admin. That's all the So another question, can Power BI build visualizations on top of huge data volume sources from upstream, database, ETL? Are there any data volume limits? Yeah, good question.
Really good question. Sort of theoretically, no. So I've seen Power BI reports doing real-time reporting over trillions of rows of data via direct query sitting over a Synapse analytics. Obviously, the architecture and structure of that is extremely complicated. So the more real-time and the larger your data set, the more complicated your architecture is, and you obviously need to think about that. But no, there's no, so there are data limits for import models, where, so if you want to bring, so there's two ways, if you like, to bring information into the Power BI service. One way is via an import model. That's where you get all of the data and you bring it into your Power BI model. And so there's limitations around that. You can only have a 1 gig PBIX file inside the a pro tenant, for example, or it can be 10 gig, I think, inside premium, right? So they're quite large. That's millions of rows of data, but it is a limitation. If you're talking direct query, though, that's where Power BI basically is the front end and pushes queries back to your server infrastructure. So it's just a front end on top of whatever you want. You got 1 trillion rows, it'll show 1 trillion rows. You got a bazillion million rows, it'll show that's the way that it works. And so there's no limit in terms of what you could do, but there's obviously architectural cost and things like that around.
You have to have a really good capacity in your backend database, otherwise it will take forever.
Exactly. Yeah, lots and lots of considerations around how to architect that correctly and make it work. But it's technically possible.
Cool.
Yep.
And I guess a new feature which was released, or I don't know if it's released just yet, but it was announced at MBAS, was the that kind of blending between import and direct query, where they've got the kind of automated aggregations. So I think that's not sure where that sits, but I think that means that it will open up a lot more potential where you have large data sets or you have slow direct query.
Yeah, and it's all about the time when somebody. So the way direct query works is every time you interact with your dashboard, it sends a new query back to the server. And if you're interacting with your dashboard in such a way that sends a very large query back, a slow query, then your dashboard will sit there and spin its wheels while it's waiting for the server to return the volumes. And so automatic aggregations potentially helps with that by automatically aggregating certain tables, so that if you're looking at it only the monthly volume, but your data's at every second, it'll only show you, like, it'll cache the monthly, and then you won't have to, it'll be much faster. It'll only get monthly volume when you're looking at monthly, and then it'll only go back to get the day by day or second by second when you go back for that directly. And so, yeah, and it's another thing around the architecture of Power BI reports.
Cool, awesome. And we've got a few more questions on audit logs and admin. So One question is, how do we check, download audit logs of who and when updated the reports and data sets? And also, as a Power BI admin, which tasks, according to you, are the most important ones?
Power BI admin stuff. So, okay, so the audit log. So there's a couple of different places where audit logging happens, and it depends on what you want to do. So there's Office 365. If you want super crazy audit, everything, show me everything anybody ever did, that's the Office 365 audit log. So Power BI sits inside the Office 365 tenant. Inside Office 365, there's audit logging, and audit logging for whatever you like. Now, your Office 365 administrator can turn on audit logging for your Power BI, which is one of the features of sort of enterprise audit logging inside Office 365, and it will give you literally every interaction that happens on your Power BI tenant, from who did it and all that kind of stuff. There's more basic audit logging, as in user audit logging, the type of stuff that you're talking about. I think that's native within the Power BI tenant that you can access. I think there's reports and stuff like that, automatic reports. I haven't looked at them recently, but I've seen certainly usage logging and that kind of stuff, and usage reporting is available out of the box. If you've got a gateway, then there's also audit logging on the gateway. So a gateway is when you've got on-premises data, like stuff on your computer or on a SQL database on an actual server. Anything that passes through the gateway can be run by audit logs there as well. So there's full enterprise grade audit logging across the whole service, but there's a few different places you need to look for it.
And the audit logs, which are really easy to get, and Power BI creates those audit log reports like you were talking about in the Power BI service, they only last 90 days, don't they? If you want anything more than that, then you have to go up and save it.
That's right. Yeah, you'll need to set up probably a data lake and pull that log out and start, and then build a Power BI report on top of it that shows you, that's the ever growing circle of Power BI. Yeah.
So we've got a question about forecasting data. So we have an inbuilt predictive analytics feature in Power BI that can be seen in a graph or can be seen as a table. Is there any way we can save that forecasted figure and then use that to create visualizations?
Short answer is no, I don't think so. That's an annoying feature of the way that that forecasting engine works. Inside Power BI, it's like a visual thing rather than a. So Power BI doesn't generate data as such. So Power BI is never the middle piece. It's not a piece of middleware. It's not a data transformation piece. It doesn't generate new data, if that makes sense. What it will do is provide visualization on top of data. It's a read and interact with data tool. It's not a, so there's no good architecture for, say, pulling information into your Power BI report and then further processing that information that's generated by the Power BI report downstream. Now, that's notwithstanding a whole bunch of caveats, right? Because things like data flows are integration pieces. So a data flow in the Power BI service is it like generates it's Power Query in the cloud, and it generates a table that you can use in other Power BI reports. So if you did your forecasting in Power Query, yes, you could use that downstream, but I think what you're talking about is that the line graph forecasting that gets generated visually, there's no real way that doesn't generate that necessarily anywhere. You'd probably need to come up with a different way of doing it. And there's a bunch of different third-party forecasting and planning tools that you can use to do that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's really annoying. I find that really annoying, not being able to interact with that.
Yeah, we had that the other day where we wanted to have a trend line, but we wanted that information brought out of the analytics feature so we could display it differently on different visuals.
Yeah.
And you can just calculate it using DAX. But a bit of a pain, like it would be nice if you could. But yeah, I think you're totally right. It's hard because then you're stuck with all that formatting it does. And it's a bit of a black box as well, especially the forecasting. That's a really good question. So another question from Simon Walker. I'd be interested in the answer on how to monitor Power BI usage from an admin perspective. It's painful to export the audit logs. So I think we've had a bit of a chat about that.
Yeah, it was answered for me, so it's fine. Thanks, Alice.
Yeah,
cool. Awesome. Cool. But yeah, definitely Greg is your go-to person for admin and auditing. We got another comment here. In the future, do we have any sessions on paginated reports? Yeah, I reckon this would be really cool because with the release of the paginated report custom visual inside of Power BI, then that would be really cool just to see how we can interact. And also, I know a lot of environmental organizations currently do SSRS reporting, and paginated reports can replace that as well. So if we do have anyone on the call today who's a bit of an expert in paginated reports, or you've played around with it in your environmental organization, then please get in touch. That'll be a really cool session. Have you done much on paginated reports, Greg?
bits and pieces. Everybody loves paginated reports still. They love their PDFs and their pixel perfect reports. So yeah, we do tend to get the occasional request with that kind of stuff. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's our bread and butter necessarily. It's where we have legacy reporting that we have to replicate, and they still want to use the Power BI service, to be honest.
And
I think, yeah.
And for people who are on the call who are from an environmental kind of engineering background and you're not too sure what is a paginated report, it's the ability to create repeating pages of PDFs of say 1,000 of the same, say like groundwater monitoring chart for different parameters. So it's essentially what we do in our engineering reports, but typically you just run a macro from Excel and export it all. You can do it within Power BI and it talks to your database. And so there is a real big need for this still. People do like the snapshot in time of your results at a specific point. We still need those reports as PDFs for like legislation and things like that, compliance reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I quite like the, you know, if paginated reporting is a premium only feature, and PPU makes it so premium per user. It's a type of license that makes it pretty affordable to do. If you do have that kind of sort of one-off regulatory type of save out PDFs that you need to do. But I quite like the pattern of having, you build your Power BI model and then you build an Excel file that sits on top of that Power BI model using Analyze in Excel. And then you can use like OLAP cube formulas or get pivot data type stuff to actually make a pixel perfect sort of version, Excel version, and then you can export that out as a PDF pretty easily. And that's an interface that a lot of people are much more familiar with. So we do that sometimes rather than go down the paginated reporting path as well. If people are familiar with Excel and they like Excel and they want to use Excel, then just give them Excel, you know. So
yeah, and if they've already got their nice page set up, they've got their macro
exactly. You can make it look exactly the same.
The data source. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. So I got a question from Vishnu. Can we do version control in Power BI when we have multiple developers working on the same report or dashboard? Yeah, that's a great question.
Yep. Oh, this is a sore point for me, Vishnu. I feel you. I feel you. Okay, so the probably not in the way that you're thinking, and I want to clarify. There's a couple of things. There's a couple of pieces to this, Vishnu. One is version control, and the other one is two developers working on the same report. They're actually two different concepts in the DevOps world, right? Version control is like if we save a version of our Power BI file, can we revert back from version 1 to version 2 or upgrade to, you know, like, are we saving metadata around the version of that report, and can we roll back if something happens we do something wrong and we need to revert, right? That's kind of what we mean by version control. And you can do that with your Power BI, your PBIX file that gets generated by Power BI is like a blob. It's like a document in Word. It's like a docx or an Excel. It's basically, the way that it's structured is it's a zip file. It's got a bunch of metadata inside that zip file. It's mostly in JSON and XML and all this kind of sort of like structured languages or structured formats. That defines what that Power BI file is. Now, it's really, really hard for Microsoft to break that file apart and do stuff with it, which is what you do when you're talking about version control and multiple developers. You're usually talking about what I call branch merge patterns, right? Which is you've got code, you've got a piece of code on a notepad when you're doing your sort of development, and you can have one developer branch a version of that off. So they version off, and then they work on their feature. So they change a piece of the notepad and then they merge it back in, right? So there's a master branch, and you branch off, you make your change and you merge it back in. So that branch merge pattern, it's basically impossible in a Power BI file. It's because of the structure of them and the way that they work. So what Microsoft's done to try and make this more enterprise and more developer friendly for developers who are interested in version control and branch merge patterns is there's ways to decouple the development of your Power BI file. So if you think about a Power BI file, it's basically made up of a few different pieces. The first piece is your Power Query, right? Go and get the data, bring it in. That's the first piece of code. The second piece of code is your model, right? The thing that defines the relationships, your DAX, the stuff that does your calculations. That's the middle piece. And then the third piece is your visualizations. Where is the pixels on the screen? How do they interact with each other? What are the different bits and pieces? So if you think of those Power BI file, a PBIX file being made up of those three sections, you can actually have three different developers work on three different sections if you structure it in this way, where you have a data flow for your Power Query. So the data flow is the Power Query. It acts independently of your files. Then you have a model file, and the model file is a PBIX file that defines the model. And then you do a reference to that model file in the service and have a visual file. And that only has the visuals that refers to the model. That way, with those three files, you've got a data flow that has your query, you've got the model that holds the model, and you've got visuals that hold the visuals. You could have three developers work completely independently of each other. And then, I mean, if the data flow guy breaks something that is dependent on in the model, then the model guy will need to update it, and then the visual person will need to update the visuals. But you can do it that way. But in terms of probably what you're thinking about, which is what we kind of think of as, you know, sort of DevOps Git integration, which is that branch merge pattern with one file, and you have multiple people all working on the master file, that doesn't happen, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah, and I guess that workflow of separating out the data set from the report and the data flow as well, that's really good. And we've seen organizations implement that really successfully. I think Melissa Coates advocates for that as well. She's got lots of practical examples of governing that type of solution as well.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for it. I would do it. And it feels like more work, but it turns out to be less work, because when you have to change something, you're only changing one piece, and you don't ending up in this sort of weird place where everything's all stuck together. So
yeah, For sure. I think we've got time maybe for one last question. We do. Thank you, everyone, for so many questions. I guess it's a testament to you, Greg. Everyone's like, oh, we need to get Greg's knowledge.
And Greg, for any of those questions we don't get to, are you happy to, we'll flick them through to you, send through some emails?
Yeah, no problem.
And
Yeah.
Put that as part of the blog. So sorry we couldn't get to them all, but you got one more.
Probably this one's quite interesting from Harper. So he has a Power BI report with a real-time database. I set up daily database refresh from Power BI portal and daily refresh for the report, and subscribe to send a copy every day to my email. But the update doesn't reflect the latest data unless manually refresh the Power BI portal page multiple times. Is this a known issue, and is there a way to fix it?
I'd probably have to have a look at the specific situation, Harper, but I would say not as far as I know. That theoretically should work. So you've got a daily refresh and you've set up a subscription and it's sending you a copy every day, unless it would depend on the refresh time, maybe if it takes a really long time to refresh and the subscription's set to, I assume the subscription is set to send after the refresh, right? But if it was somehow not sent, I don't know, there could be something out of sync there, but I don't know. So the short answer is I don't know of any issues. The best place literally for any question regarding Power BI, if you've got something like that where it's like specific and you want to find out is this a known issue or not, is go to the community.powerbi.com and go to desktop. Microsoft engineers actually monitor that, MVPs monitor that. You could put that question in there and you'll literally have a Microsoft person go, oh, we didn't know about it, or yes, we know of this issue, and they'll get you to put it down. So community.powerbi.com/ whatever it is, I think it's blog or something like that. There's the it's the Power BI community link, and I'm sure Christian is about to post the link in the chat.
Yeah, we'll find that link and we'll put it in the chat as well. We had one last question from Pat asking when the June desktop release is available. So for those of you who don't know, Power BI updates monthly. It's still June, so we've still got time. But usually it happens in the middle of the month, right?
Yeah, it's supposed to happen last week. It got to, there was a tweet last week, actually, because I was talking about it at our meetup, and we're saying, oh, it's due today, you know, everybody look out for it. And then there was a tweet while we were having the meetup from JH Yeren, who does the updates, saying, sorry, it's delayed for a few days. So I think it's should be right now, like tomorrow. So yeah, something like that.
Awesome, should be soon. Well, thank you so much. I'll just share my screen again just to close out. Just a reminder, up on our Power BI for Enviros meetup, we've got the next session there, so you can register if you're keen to attend. So we'll have Joel Gallagher, Mim, and also I think maybe Stephen Thatcher from the Green Building Council Australia presenting on kind of Power BI for the energy sector. So that will be really interesting. We've recorded this session, so we'll put it up on our YouTube channel and blog later this week. We'll also include lots of the links that we shared, and maybe just a summary of all of Greg's amazing admin tips, admin portal.
Yeah, Matt Berg, Greg, in case you didn't see it, Matt Berg had to jump off early, but did say you've rekindled that unicorn title with your knowledge, and thanks a lot for sharing that with us. So I think everyone on the call really appreciated it. So
no worries.
And thanks everyone for dialing in as well. We hope you got a lot out of this session, and yeah, we're happy to stay on for another 5-10 after this if you want to go ahead and chat. But yeah, officially that's the end of the meetup session. So just like to thank Greg again. Wealth of knowledge there.